A lonely 13-year-old boy sat silently in the corner of his classroom, hiding a secret talent that no one knew about, until a small, unexpected gift changed everything. What happened next shocked the entire town and left everyone speechless. But why would a shy boy suddenly become the center of attention? And who was behind this life-altering surprise? Stay tuned to find out how one small act of kindness can transform a life forever. In a small, picturesque town nestled between rolling hills, there was a quiet middle school that almost no one outside the town had ever heard of. In one of its classrooms, a boy named Ben sat alone at the back of the room, his head bowed low, eyes glued to his notebook. Ben wasn't just shy, he was practically invisible. He never raised his hand, never made eye contact, and never spoke unless spoken to. The other kids, wrapped up in their own circles, hardly noticed him, and if they did, it was only to whisper or snicker. But Ben didn't mind. Or at least that's what he told himself every day. What the others didn't know was that Ben harbored a secret talent, a talent that set him apart in a way none of them could have imagined. He was an artist. His notebook wasn't filled with notes or doodles. It was a treasure trove of stunning sketches, each one meticulously drawn, showing a world far beyond the confines of that dull classroom. But no one ever saw these drawings. They were his escape, his way of speaking without words. One rainy afternoon, as raindrops drummed softly against the windows, Ms. Amelia, the class's homeroom teacher, noticed something out of the corner of her eye. She was a gentle woman in her early 30s, known for her warm smile and the way she paid attention to details that often went unnoticed by others. Today was no different. While her students busily chatted away, she spotted Ben hunched over his notebook, his pencil moving quickly, yet softly across the page. Ms. Amelia had seen Ben's quiet demeanor, his tendency to shrink away from attention. She had often wondered what went on in his mind, why he seemed so distant. Today, curiosity got the better of her. As the bell rang and the students hurried out, she approached Ben's desk quietly. He flinched when he saw her standing there, quickly shutting his notebook as if guarding a secret. "May I?" she asked gently, gesturing to the closed notebook. Ben hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously before giving a reluctant nod. Ms. Amelia opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. Each drawing was breathtaking, filled with detail, emotion, and a skill far beyond Ben's age. There were sketches of nature, people, fantastical creatures, and moments that seemed frozen in time. It was like peering into the soul of a young boy who had 1,000 stories to tell but no voice to tell them. "These are incredible, Ben," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "Why don't you show these to others?" Ben shrugged, his shoulders stiff. "They won't understand," he mumbled almost to himself. "They'll just laugh." Miss Amelia's heart ached at his words. How could someone so talented, so filled with potential, feel so small and unworthy? "You know, the greatest artists in history were often misunderstood at first," she said softly. "But they didn't give up. They kept creating, no matter what." Ben glanced up at her, his eyes searching hers for something. Acceptance, validation, hope. Ms. Amelia smiled gently. "Promise me one thing, Ben. Don't hide your gift. Keep drawing. One day, you'll see how special you really are." Ben didn't respond, but something in his gaze softened. Miss Amelia stepped back, allowing him his space, and watched as he carefully tucked his notebook into his bag and slipped out of the room. But even as he left, she couldn't shake the feeling that this boy was destined for something greater, something beyond the walls of this small classroom. That evening, as Miss Amelia sat at her desk grading papers, she couldn't stop thinking about Ben's drawings. She knew she had to do something to show him that his art deserved to be seen. The next morning, she arrived at school early and slipped into the art supplies room. There, she picked out a high-quality set of sketching pencils, wrapped them in a neat bow, and placed them along with a small note inside a brown envelope. When Ben arrived at his desk that day, he found the envelope waiting for him. His brows furrowed in confusion as he carefully opened it. Inside was a set of sketching pencils that looked far more expensive than anything he had ever owned. His eyes widened, tracing the smooth graphite tips, the feel of the high-quality wood in his hands. But what truly caught his attention was the small note nestled inside. For the artist who sees the world differently, don't stop creating. Your talent is meant to shine. Miss Amelia. Ben's heart hammered in his chest. He glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh at him. But no one was watching. It was just him, sitting alone at his desk with a gift he could barely comprehend. Miss Amelia passed by his desk and gave him a soft smile, a smile that said everything he needed to know. There were no words exchanged, no questions asked, but something deep inside Ben shifted, a spark he had never felt before. The day passed in a blur. At lunch, instead of hiding his notebook, Ben pulled it out and began to draw. He used the new pencils, feeling the way they glided effortlessly across the paper, bringing his sketches to life in a way he had never experienced before. For the first time, he felt like a real artist, like his drawings mattered. By the end of lunch, he had finished a beautiful piece, a sketch of a majestic eagle soaring high above a mountain range, its wings spread wide against the backdrop of a setting sun. When he handed the drawing to Miss Amelia at the end of the day, he couldn't meet her gaze. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Miss Amelia took the drawing gingerly, her eyes misting over as she looked at the intricate details, the way each feather seemed to shimmer with life. "Ben, it's amazing. I don't even know what to say." Ben shifted uncomfortably. It's a thank you for the pencils, for believing in me." Ms. Amelia placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ben, I didn't just believe in you. I knew you could do this, and I'm going to make sure others see it too." Ben's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean? But before he could ask, Ms. Amelia turned and carefully placed the drawing in her folder. "Trust me, Ben, you're not going to be invisible anymore." He watched her walk away, confusion and hope warring inside him. He had no idea what she had planned, but something told him that Miss Amelia wasn't done surprising him yet. For the first time in a long time, Ben felt a tiny flicker of excitement. Excitement mixed with fear, but excitement nonetheless. And that night, as he lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, he couldn't help but think of Miss Amelia's words. "One day you'll see how special you really are." Something was changing. He could feel it. He just didn't know what it was. Yet, the following day, Ben arrived at school with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation fluttering in his chest. Usually, he would have walked into the classroom with his head down, avoiding eye contact, hoping to blend in with the walls and remain unseen. But today felt different. It was as if Miss Amelia's note, with its simple words of encouragement, had breathed life into his soul, whispering that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to be invisible. But as soon as he entered the classroom, reality seemed to crash down on him again. The usual chatter filled the room. Kids were laughing, joking, sharing stories about their morning routines. No one even glanced in his direction. The euphoria of the previous day started to fade as Ben sank into his seat, slipping back into the shadows like a ghost. Maybe yesterday had been a fluke. Maybe he was just fooling himself, thinking that a few kind words could change anything. But then, his eyes drifted toward his backpack, where the set of sketching pencils Miss Amelia had given him was tucked away. He felt the weight of the gift pulling at him, a tangible reminder that someone had noticed him, someone had seen his talent and believed in it. He took a deep breath, and before he could talk himself out of it, he slowly pulled the notebook out. At first, his hand trembled slightly as he flipped to a blank page. His heart thudded loudly in his ears, making him glance around nervously. But no one was paying attention. He picked up one of the new pencils, feeling its smooth texture between his fingers. With a deep breath, he began to sketch. For the next hour, he was lost in his own world. The noise around him faded as his pencil glided over the paper, creating smooth lines and intricate details. He was drawing something new this time, a lone wolf standing on a cliff's edge, its fur bristling in the wind, its eyes gazing out over a vast landscape filled with rolling hills and distant mountains. The wolf looked strong, unbreakable, as if it could conquer anything that stood in its path. Ben didn't even notice when the bell rang, signaling the start of the next period. He barely looked up as students shuffled out of the room, chatting and laughing as they went. It wasn't until he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder that he jerked back to reality, blinking in confusion. Sorry to interrupt, Miss Amelia said softly, smiling down at him. But it's lunchtime, and you look like you could use a break. Ben glanced at the clock and then back at his drawing. Had he really been sketching for that long? He felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. I, I didn't mean to. Miss Amelia shook her head quickly. No, Ben, don't apologize. I didn't want to disturb you because you look so focused. That's what true artists do. They get lost in their work, and it's beautiful. Her gaze shifted to the notebook in front of him, and Ben hesitated, his instinct to close it and hide his drawing. But there was something so genuine in her expression, something so free of judgment or criticism, that he slowly turned the notebook toward her. She gasped softly, her eyes widening as she took in the image of the wolf. Ben, this is incredible, she whispered. The detail, the emotion. It's like I can feel the wind, the strength in its eyes. Her voice held a note of awe, and Ben felt a small surge of pride, a warmth spreading in his chest. No one had ever reacted to his drawings like this before, but before he could bask in the moment, the sound of footsteps and giggles echoed through the empty hallway. Miss Amelia turned slightly, her expression shifting as a group of students walked by the open door. One of the girls, Lauren, the class's unofficial leader, glanced inside, her gaze skimming over the room, before landing on Ben's notebook. Wow, what's that? She asked, arching a brow. Before Ben could hide his sketch, she stepped inside, the other students trailing behind her. Let me see, she demanded, her tone curious but also tinged with something else, something that made Ben's heart plummet. It's nothing, Ben mumbled, reaching to close the notebook, but Miss Amelia placed a gentle hand on his arm. Actually, it's something very special, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. Ben is an incredible artist, and this is his latest piece. Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly, studying the drawing with a critical gaze. Then to Ben's shock, she nodded slowly. Huh, it's pretty cool, I guess. Her voice lacked its usual edge of superiority, and the other kids murmured in agreement. Yeah, it's really good, one of the boys added, sounding almost impressed. Ben couldn't believe what he was hearing. Were they complimenting his work? Him, the invisible kid who had never been part of their conversations? Never been anything more than a shadow on the wall? Miss Amelia beamed, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. See? I told you your art deserves to be seen. The group lingered for a moment longer, casting glances at Ben and his drawing before drifting back into the hallway, their murmurs trailing behind them. But their expressions were different, curious, almost respectful. They hadn't laughed or sneered. They hadn't made fun of him. If anything, they looked, impressed. As soon as they were gone, Ben let out a shaky breath. His hands were trembling slightly, his pulse racing. I didn't think they'd... I mean... Miss Amelia's smile softened. Ben, you have something special, something people will recognize if you let them. But I know it's not easy to share your talent. It's scary. But that's what courage is, doing something even when you're scared. Ben swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Courage. He had never thought of himself as brave, but maybe, just maybe, he could try. The next few days passed in a blur. Ben found himself drawing more and more, his new pencils almost a magical extension of his fingers. Miss Amelia's words echoed in his mind, pushing him to experiment, to try new things. Each time he finished a sketch, he would quietly show it to her, and her reactions were always the same: genuine delight, admiration, and encouragement. But it wasn't just Miss Amelia who noticed. Slowly, other students began to take interest. They would glance at his drawings when they thought he wasn't looking, whispering to each other, asking questions. And one day, to his utter shock, Lauren herself approached him during lunch. Hey, Ben, right? She said awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot. I was wondering, could you draw something for me? Like maybe a portrait of my dog? Ben stared at her, his mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. Was this a joke? But Lauren's expression was sincere, her eyes wide and hopeful. I can try, he stammered finally, feeling a strange mixture of confusion and excitement. I mean, I've never drawn a dog before, but it's okay, Lauren interrupted, smiling brightly. I know you can do it. You're really talented, you know. Ben could hardly believe his ears. Lauren, Lauren, the most popular girl in class, thought he was talented. It felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. And as he sat down that night, sketching out the soft, floppy ears and bright eyes of Lauren's golden retriever, he felt something shift inside him, a tiny, fragile bud of confidence beginning to bloom. He handed Lauren the finished sketch the next day, his heart in his throat as she examined it. "Oh my gosh, it's perfect," she squealed, hugging the drawing to her chest. "Thank you so much, Ben. You're amazing." For the first time in his life, Ben felt a genuine smile tug at his lips. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't invisible after all. Maybe he was something more, something special. And maybe, just maybe, Miss Amelia had been right. One quiet afternoon, just a few days after the unexpected encounter with Lauren, Ms. Amelia sat at her desk long after the last bell rang. The classroom was empty, and the soft hum of the school's heating system was the only sound that accompanied her. Spread across her desk were several of Ben's most recent drawings, each one more breathtaking than the last. There was the wolf standing proudly against a backdrop of stars, a portrait of Lauren's dog capturing every tiny detail, and a stunning sketch of a sunset over a windswept field. Miss Amelia's fingers traced the edges of the paper, marveling at how much talent this young boy held. She had always known Ben was gifted, but now it was clear that his work was something extraordinary, something that went beyond mere talent. It was raw emotion and imagination, captured in graphite and ink. She knew Ben still struggled to see it, still hesitated to believe in himself fully, and she knew he needed just one more push to understand what he was truly capable of. Ms. Amelia's gaze shifted to her computer screen, where the school's official website was open. The cursor hovered over the upload button. She hesitated for a split second, her heart racing. Was this the right thing to do? Taking a deep breath, she clicked the button, watching as Ben's drawings appeared in the school's online art gallery. She had labeled them artwork by an anonymous young artist, keeping his identity hidden. She wanted people to see the art first, to appreciate it without bias or prejudice, but she had no idea what would happen next. The very next morning, as Ben walked into the classroom, he noticed something strange. Students who usually paid no attention to him were whispering excitedly, stealing glances at him before quickly looking away. He shifted uneasily, wondering if he had something on his face or if they were talking about him again, laughing at him, mocking him. His shoulders hunched instinctively, and he made a beeline for his seat at the back of the room, wishing he could disappear. But just as he sat down, Ms. Amelia's voice rang out from the front of the room. "Class, before we start today's lesson, I have a little surprise for you." Ben's heart sank. Surprises were never good. Surprises meant attention, and attention meant, no, he didn't want to think about it. Miss Amelia clicked a button on her laptop, and the projector flickered to life. A series of drawings appeared on the screen at the front of the class. His drawings, the wolf, the sunset, Lauren's dog. Ben froze, his eyes wide with shock. What was happening? "These beautiful pieces were recently uploaded to our school's online art gallery," Ms. Amelia announced, her smile warm and genuine. "They were created by one of your very own classmates, someone who has an incredible talent that deserves to be recognized." A murmur swept through the room. Students leaned forward, their eyes glued to the screen. There were gasps of admiration, whispers of awe. "Who drew those?" someone asked in a hushed voice. Ms. Amelia's smile widened. "Ben," she said softly, turning to him, "would you like to come up and say a few words about your art?" Ben's stomach dropped. His entire body went rigid. No. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to stay invisible, to hide in the shadows. He couldn't. "Ben?" Ms. Amelia's gentle voice cut through his panic, and he looked up, meeting her calm, encouraging gaze. She nodded slightly as if to say, "It's okay. You can do this." Slowly, like a man walking through a dream, Ben stood up. His legs felt like jelly as he made his way to the front of the room. The stares of his classmates burned into him, 1,000 eyes watching his every move. He reached the front of the class and turned around, his heart hammering wildly in his chest. Hi, he stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Um, I'm Ben, and these are mine. For a moment there was silence. Then suddenly the room erupted in applause. Ben blinked, stunned. They were clapping? For him? That's awesome, Ben, someone shouted. You're amazing. Can you draw something for me? Another voice called out. Yeah, do you take requests? A girl in the back joked. Ben's face burned red, but a small, uncertain smile tugged at his lips. They weren't laughing at him. They weren't making fun of him. They were appreciating him, respecting him. He glanced at Miss Amelia, who was watching with a look of quiet pride. And in that moment, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish completely. It never would. But there was something else now, something stronger. A flicker of confidence, a tiny flame of hope. He stumbled through a few more awkward sentences, thanking everyone before quickly retreating back to his seat. His classmates continued to buzz with excitement, talking about his art, asking him questions, and for the first time, Ben found himself answering. It felt strange, surreal, like he had stepped into a parallel world where he wasn't invisible anymore. But that was only the beginning. By lunchtime, the news of his drawings had spread through the entire school. Students from other classes came up to him in the hallways, curious and admiring. Some even asked for his autograph, which left him utterly speechless. He had no idea what to say, so he just scribbled his name on a few scraps of paper, feeling like he was in a dream he couldn't wake up from. But the real shock came when Miss Amelia pulled him aside at the end of the day, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Ben, I have something to show you, she said, holding up her phone. He leaned in, peering at the screen. It was the school's website, specifically the online art gallery. His drawings were there, front and center, with dozens of comments underneath. Comments like, "Wow, who is this kid? This is incredible. This is the best art I've seen in a long time. Can we see more? Whoever drew these, you're a genius." Ben stared at the screen, his mind reeling. I I don't understand, he whispered. Miss Amelia's smile softened. Ben, people want to see your art. They're inspired by it. You're not just a kid with a sketchbook anymore. You're an artist. He shook his head slowly, disbelief still clouding his thoughts. How could this be real? How could he, the boy no one ever noticed, suddenly be noticed? But the surprises didn't stop there. The next day, as Ben walked into the classroom, he was greeted by something that made his heart nearly stop. Standing at the front of the room was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a neat suit and holding a camera. Next to him was Miss Amelia, beaming proudly. Ben, I'd like you to meet Mr. Thompson, Miss Amelia said. He's a reporter from the local newspaper. He saw your drawings in the school's gallery and wants to write a story about you. Ben's jaw dropped. A story? About me? Mr. Thompson chuckled softly. Yes, young man. Your art is extraordinary, and I'd like to share it with the entire town. How do you feel about that? How did he feel? Terrified, exhilarated, confused, all at once. He looked at Miss Amelia, searching for guidance, for reassurance. She nodded slowly, her eyes gentle. It's up to you, Ben, she said softly. If you're not ready, we can wait. But I think you should consider it. You have a gift that people deserve to see. Ben swallowed hard, his throat dry. Could he do this? Could he really step out of the shadows and let people see who he truly was? He took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage he had. Oh, okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mr. Thompson interviewed him, took photos of his drawings, and asked about his inspirations, his process, his dreams. Ben answered as best as he could, stumbling over his words, but Mr. Thompson was patient and kind, always smiling and encouraging. When the article was finally published, Ben couldn't believe his eyes. There on the front page of the local newspaper was a headline that made his heart skip a beat. Small town boy with big talent. Meet the young artist who's capturing our hearts. His drawings were showcased in full color, along with the story of how he had started drawing as a way to cope with loneliness and how Miss Amelia had encouraged him to share his talent. The response was overwhelming. People from all over town started reaching out, sending messages of support and admiration. Strangers stopped him on the street to congratulate him, to tell him how much his art meant to them. And through it all, Ben felt something growing inside him, something warm and bright. For the first time in his life, he felt like he mattered, like he was seen, like he wasn't just a shy, invisible kid in the corner, but someone worth noticing. And he owed it all to Miss Amelia's small gesture, the pencils, the note, and the belief that he was more than he had ever imagined. The following weeks were nothing short of a whirlwind. After the newspaper article was published, Ben's life took a dramatic turn. He was no longer the quiet boy who lingered at the back of the classroom. He was now Ben, the talented young artist everyone wanted to talk to. His classmates treated him differently, not with the shallow, forced politeness they had before, but with genuine admiration and interest. Ben still struggled to adjust to all the attention. It was strange and overwhelming to have people complimenting his art, asking for his opinion, and even inviting him to sit with them at lunch. Part of him still wanted to shrink away, to hide in his familiar corner, but he couldn't deny the spark of excitement that flickered in his chest every time someone praised his drawings. But the biggest surprise came when Ms. Amelia approached him one chilly Friday afternoon, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "Ben, I have some news for you," she said softly, kneeling beside his desk. Ben looked up from his latest sketch, curiosity and apprehension mixing in his eyes. Miss Amelia held up a letter, the paper crisp and official-looking. "It's from the county's art association," she explained, her smile widening. "They saw the article in the newspaper and they want to feature your work in a local art exhibition." Ben's jaw dropped. "What? What?" he stammered, staring at her as if she had just told him he'd won the lottery. "You mean they want me? But why?" "Because your art is extraordinary, Ben," Miss Amelia said simply. "They want to give you a platform to share it with more people. This is your chance to show everyone what you can do." His head spun. An art exhibition? For his work? It didn't feel real. "But I'm not, I'm just a kid," he whispered. "Why would they want to see my drawings?" "Because your art isn't just drawings on paper," Miss Amelia replied gently. "It's a story of resilience, of imagination, of strength. People need to see it, Ben. They need to feel it." Ben swallowed hard, his heart racing. It was terrifying. Stepping into a world he had never imagined, exposing his deepest thoughts and emotions to strangers. But then he remembered the look on Lauren's face when he had drawn her dog. He remembered the applause from his classmates, the kind words from the people in town, the way Ms. Amelia's eyes shone with pride every time she looked at his work. Maybe he could do it. Maybe he could be brave, just this once. I'll do it," he whispered finally, his voice trembling but resolute. "I want to try." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Miss Amelia helped him select his best pieces, carefully mounting them on pristine white boards. There were portraits, landscapes, fantastical creatures, and more. Each drawing was a window into Ben's mind, a glimpse of a world where lines and shadows told stories no words could capture. The night of the exhibition arrived faster than Ben expected. He stood outside the large, elegant building that housed the county's art gallery, his palms sweating and his heart pounding wildly in his chest. People were already streaming inside. Men and women in suits and dresses, artists with paint-smeared hands, families holding children's hands, all chattering excitedly. Ben felt a surge of panic. What if they hated his work? What if they thought he was just some silly kid who didn't belong here? What if— "Ben?" A calm voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. He turned to see Miss Amelia standing beside him, her eyes soft and encouraging. "You belong here. You've earned this. Just breathe, okay? One step at a time." He nodded shakily, taking a deep breath. One step at a time. He could do this. He had to do this. They walked into the gallery together, the bright lights and hushed whispers washing over them. Ben's drawings were displayed along one of the main walls, framed and illuminated for everyone to see. A small sign beside them read, "Art by Ben Hargrove, age 13." The sight of his name in print made his heart stutter. It was real. This was really happening. People were already gathering around his section, murmuring in low voices as they admired his work. Ben hovered nervously at the edge of the room, his fingers twitching at his sides. He saw a group of older artists leaning in close, their expressions serious and contemplative. A young couple pointed at his drawing of the wolf, their eyes wide with appreciation. A family stood in front of his sunset sketch, the parents explaining something to their children, who looked up at the drawing with wonder in their eyes. Slowly, cautiously, Ben stepped closer, straining to hear what they were saying. "This is amazing," one of the artists murmured, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "The detail, the emotion. This kid has serious talent." "Who is he?" another woman asked, peering at the small sign. "I've never heard of him before." "He's just a kid," the man replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "But look at the control, the precision. It's like he's been doing this for decades." Ben's breath caught in his throat. They were talking about him. They were praising him. He felt lightheaded, as if he might float away at any moment. But the biggest shock came when a tall man in a sleek black suit approached his section, his gaze sharp and intent. He was older, with silver hair and a stern expression that made Ben instinctively shrink back. He watched as the man examined each drawing carefully, his face unreadable. And then, to Ben's utter disbelief, the man turned and looked directly at him. "You're the artist?" he asked, his voice low and authoritative. Ben blinked, his heart hammering. Yes, sir," he managed, his voice trembling. The man nodded slowly, his gaze intense. "These are exceptional," he said quietly. "You have a rare gift, young man, one that deserves to be nurtured." Ben's mouth opened and closed, his mind reeling. What? What was happening? "I'm Julian West," the man continued, holding out his hand. "I'm an art director at the state's Fine Arts Academy. I'd like to discuss a mentorship with you, if you're interested." "Mentorship? Fine Arts Academy?" Ben stared at the man, his thoughts spinning wildly. This couldn't be real. This kind of thing didn't happen to kids like him. But Julian's expression was serious, sincere. "Think about it," Julian said gently, handing him a business card. "You have a talent that could take you far. All you need is the right guidance." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ben standing there, staring at the card in his trembling hands. It felt like a dream, a surreal, impossible dream. He looked up, searching for Miss Amelia, and found her watching from across the room, her eyes shining with tears of pride. "Miss Amelia," he whispered as she hurried over. What just happened?" She laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. "Ben, I think you just found your first real opportunity." His first real opportunity. The words echoed in his mind, sending a shiver down his spine. He looked around the gallery, at the people admiring his art, at the smiling faces, the soft murmurs of appreciation. This was real. This was happening. He was standing in a gallery filled with his work, being offered mentorships by art directors. He was an artist, a real artist. "Do you want to do it?" Miss Amelia asked gently. "It's up to you, Ben. No pressure. But I think you're ready for this." Ben looked down at the card again, his heart pounding. Could he really do it? Could he take this step, leave behind the shy, invisible boy he had always been, and become something more? Slowly, he lifted his gaze to meet Miss Amelia's. I want to try," he whispered, the words trembling but firm. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I knew you would," she said softly, squeezing his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Ben. So proud." And in that moment, standing in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by strangers who were praising his work and offering him opportunities he had never even dreamed of, Ben felt something bloom inside him, a fierce, bright joy that seemed to fill every corner of his being. He was no longer just a boy with a sketchbook. He was no longer invisible. He was an artist. A star had been born. Months passed, and Ben's world changed in ways he had never imagined. After the exhibition, he accepted the mentorship with Mr. Julian West, and every week he would make the trip to the Fine Arts Academy in the neighboring city. It was a daunting experience at first, walking into a place filled with professional artists, each one so much more experienced and skilled than he was. But Julian welcomed him with open arms, treating him not like a child, but like an artist in his own right. Julian guided him, teaching him new techniques, introducing him to different styles and mediums, pushing him to experiment and challenge himself. Ben found himself growing, not just as an artist, but as a person. With each lesson, his confidence blossomed. His lines became bolder, his compositions more intricate, and with each stroke of his pencil or brush, he felt a part of himself coming alive. But it wasn't just the art. For the first time in his life, Ben felt like he belonged somewhere. At the academy, people saw him for who he truly was. They didn't look at him with pity or confusion. They looked at him with respect, with admiration. It was overwhelming and wonderful all at once. And slowly, bit by bit, the fear that had always shadowed him began to melt away. Back at school, things were different too. Ben's classmates no longer treated him like the shy, invisible kid in the corner. He was Ben, the artist, the boy whose drawings had been in a real art exhibition. Even the teachers spoke to him differently, asking about his work, encouraging him to keep going. He still preferred to sit quietly in class, still found himself shrinking back sometimes when the attention got too intense. But there was a new strength inside him, a quiet confidence that kept him grounded. One rainy afternoon, as Ben was sketching quietly at his desk, Miss Amelia approached him with a beaming smile. "Ben, I have a surprise for you," she said softly, holding up a colorful flyer. He blinked in confusion, taking the flyer from her. It was an announcement for the school's upcoming talent showcase, featuring performances and presentations from students in every grade. But what caught his eye was a small line at the bottom of the page. Special guest, Ben Hargrove, art exhibition and live drawing. His heart skipped a beat. "Live drawing?" he echoed, his voice shaking. I can't." "Yes, you can," Ms. Amelia interrupted gently, her smile unwavering. "You're going to show your work just like before. And then, if you feel comfortable, you'll do a live drawing for the audience. It doesn't have to be anything big, just a small piece, something that comes from your heart." Ben stared at her, his thoughts racing. The idea of drawing in front of a crowd, of having all those eyes on him as he worked, terrified him. But then he remembered the exhibition. He remembered the way people had reacted to his art, the way they had felt something when they looked at it. He remembered Julian's voice, patient and encouraging, urging him to push himself, to be bold, to believe. Slowly he nodded. I'll try," he whispered. The days leading up to the showcase were a blur of nerves and excitement. Miss Amelia helped him prepare, choosing a selection of his best pieces to display. He even created a few new drawings just for the event, portraits, landscapes, and one special piece that he kept hidden, waiting for the right moment. When the day of the showcase arrived, Ben stood backstage, his heart hammering wildly in his chest. The auditorium was packed, filled with students, parents, and teachers. The murmur of voices and occasional bursts of laughter drifted through the heavy curtains, making his palms sweat. He peeked out once just to see, and nearly fainted at the sight of the crowd. But then he caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the front row. Julian, his mentor, sitting with a proud smile on his face. And beside him was Miss Amelia, her eyes bright with encouragement. Seeing them there together made something inside Ben settle. He took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the sketchbook in his hands. This was his chance to show everyone, not just his art, but himself. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the corner anymore. He was Ben Hargrove, an artist. The lights dimmed slightly and the principal's voice echoed through the speakers. "And now for a special presentation, we have Ben Hargrove, one of our very own talented students, who will be sharing his artwork and creating a live drawing for us. Please give him a warm welcome." Applause erupted from the audience and Ben's legs nearly gave out. But he forced himself to step forward, his eyes fixed on the bright stage lights as he walked to the center of the stage. His drawings were already set up on easels, each one illuminated for everyone to see. He saw heads turning, heard gasps of admiration, and a soft murmur rippled through the crowd. "Good evening," he began, his voice shaking. He took a deep breath, clutching the microphone tightly. Um, I'm Ben, and I'm an artist." There was a soft chuckle from the audience, but it wasn't mocking. It was warm, encouraging. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. They were watching him, really watching him. But instead of fear, he felt a strange calm settle over him. "I used to think that being different was something to hide," he continued slowly, his voice gaining strength. "I thought that because I was quiet, or because I liked to draw instead of talk, it meant I didn't matter. But someone believed in me." He glanced at Miss Amelia, his heart swelling with gratitude. "And because of that, I started to believe in myself too." There was a soft murmur from the audience, and Ben swallowed hard, forcing himself to go on. "I'm still learning. I'm still finding my voice. But tonight, I want to share a piece that means a lot to me. It's something I made for someone who changed my life." He turned, pulling the cover off the final easel. There, in stark black and white, was a portrait of a woman standing in front of a classroom, her smile radiant, her eyes filled with kindness. It was Miss Amelia. But it wasn't just a picture. It was a story of hope, of faith, of believing in someone when no one else did. There was a collective gasp from the audience. Ben looked down, his cheeks burning, but he forced himself to keep speaking. This is for Miss Amelia. She's the reason I'm here tonight. She's the reason I started believing that maybe I'm more than just a quiet kid in the back of the room. Maybe I'm an artist." For a moment, there was silence. And then, suddenly, the audience erupted into applause. Ben's head shot up, his eyes wide with shock. They were standing, clapping, cheering, tears streaming down some of their faces. Ms. Amelia had her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Julian was beaming, his smile stretching from ear to ear. And in that moment, standing there on stage, surrounded by applause and admiration, Ben felt something he had never felt before. He felt proud. Proud of himself, proud of his art, proud of who he was. He stepped back, feeling the warmth of the spotlight on his skin, and for the first time, he didn't want to hide. He wanted to shine. The applause finally died down, and Ben took a deep breath, lifting his sketchbook and pencil. "And now," he said softly, his voice steady and sure, "I'd like to show you how I create. This is my story, in lines and shadows." With that, he began to draw. The auditorium was silent, every eye glued to him as his pencil moved gracefully across the paper. He started with a single line, a gentle curve that blossomed into a tree, its branches stretching toward the sky. Then he added more. Mountains in the background, a river winding through a lush valley, a wolf standing proudly on a cliff, its gaze fierce and unbroken. It was a story of strength, of resilience, a story of hope. And as he drew, he felt something inside him settling, something powerful and unshakable. He was Ben Hargrove. He was an artist, and he wasn't afraid anymore. When he finally stepped back, the drawing complete, the audience erupted into applause once more. Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't mind. He smiled, a real, radiant smile, and bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." And as he looked out at the crowd, at Miss Amelia's tear-streaked face, at Julian's proud grin, at the sea of faces cheering and clapping, he knew that this was only the beginning. His story was just beginning, and it was going to be a beautiful one. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more inspiring tales like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that touch the heart and ignite the soul. See you in the next one.